She dragged herself out of the brush, ribs showing through torn fur, and whispered with her eyes, not her voice. "Please, my babies." I had just pulled over off the gravel shoulder of Highway 7, thinking I saw a bundle of trash caught in the weeds. The sun had barely broken over the trees, gold washing through the mist that still clung to the fields. It should have been a peaceful start to my Saturday. Instead, I was kneeling in damp grass, my palms streaked with blood and dirt, looking into the wide, desperate eyes of a dog who had no strength left to bark. Her body trembled under my hands. She wasn't old, maybe 3, 4 years tops. Some kind of shepherd mix with a thick, tan coat, though most of it was matted now and stuck with burrs. Her back leg was mangled. There was a gash on her side. But her face was the part that broke me. She wasn't looking at me for help. She was looking through me, toward something behind the tall grass. I turned my head. At first, I saw nothing but swaying stalks and tangled brush. Then I heard it. Barely a squeak. A tiny, high-pitched whimper, then another. Oh no. I didn't even hesitate. I took off my flannel shirt and laid it over the mama dog, whispering, "Stay right here, girl. I hear them. I'll get them." It took some careful crawling and a few scratches to my arms before I found the den. An overturned log wedged under a cluster of blackberry bushes. I peeled back the branches, and there they were, 4 puppies. Not more than a couple weeks old, huddled together, their little sides rising and falling. One of them gave a yip and tried to wiggle toward me. I felt my chest tighten. "You've got babies," I said out loud. "You sweet girl. You've got babies." I pulled off my undershirt and made a sling out of it, careful not to separate them. As I backed out, keeping the bundle steady in my arms, I could already hear my own thoughts racing ahead. I didn't have time to think about what came next. My truck wasn't far. Maybe 100 feet down the road. I could get her in the back. There was a vet clinic in Maple Hill that opened at 7, but by the time I reached her again, her breathing had changed. Shallower. Slower. "Hang on," I said, crouching beside her. "Please, just hang on. Look, I have them. They're okay. Look." Her eyes found the puppies. Her tail, somehow, gave one tiny thump against the earth. Then she licked my hand, and she stopped breathing. I froze. A crow cawed in the distance. The air smelled like crushed grass and distant rain, and all I could do was sit there, holding her pups, staring at the dog who had given her last ounce of strength just to bring me close enough to save her babies. I didn't cry until I reached the truck. That's when the dam broke. I laid the pups in a box I kept behind the seat and wrapped her body in my flannel. I drove in silence. No radio, no thoughts except, don't let these babies die too. Dr. Cartwright had just opened the clinic when I pulled up. I knew him well enough from bringing in raccoons and injured birds over the years, but I don't think he'd ever seen me like that. Sweaty, shaking, barefoot, and red-eyed. "Back room," he said without a question. "Bring them in." The puppies were examined one by one. He said they were dehydrated, but otherwise okay. Eyes just barely open. Needed bottle feeding. Needed warmth. "And the mother?" "Didn't make it," I said, barely holding it together. Dr. Cartwright gave me a look. Then he sighed and nodded. "You keeping them?" "Don't know what else to do." That was the truth. I lived alone in a cabin out past Sycamore Creek. Didn't have family in the area, just my dog, Maggie, who'd passed 2 winters ago. Hadn't been ready since. Until this. Dr. Cartwright gave me formula, syringes, heating pads, and instructions. I listened to every word. Then I drove home and turned my living room into a puppy nursery. Those first nights were a blur, feeding them every 2 hours, learning their cries, naming them. I kept it simple. Ash, the gray one, Maple, the smallest, Birch and Cedar, the loud ones. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel tired. Not in the way I used to. Neighbors started hearing about it. A woman named Ellie brought me a bag of fleece blankets. Mr. Dorsey from down the road dropped off goat's milk and some old towels. Folks I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered I was out there. But what hit me hardest was the note I found in my mailbox 2 weeks later. You don't know me, but I think that dog you found was ours. Her name was Tessa. She went missing a month ago. We looked everywhere. She must have been trying to get back to her pups. Thank you for loving her at the end. And thank you for saving her babies. No return address. Just a folded photo of a younger Tessa, healthy and smiling with 2 little boys beside her. I stood on the porch for a long time, holding that photo. I looked down at the pups, now stumbling around and getting into trouble in the grass. Ash barked at a butterfly. Cedar tried to chew my boot. I smiled. They were going to be okay. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because a dog like Tessa didn't just leave behind puppies. She left behind something else. And I was going to find it. Whatever came next, I owed her that. Cedar was the first to figure out how to climb onto the couch. I watched it happen from the kitchen while trying to scramble eggs one-handed, with Ash balanced in the crook of my arm and a bottle between his tiny teeth. Cedar had this stubborn little glint in his eyes from the start, and I should have known that look meant trouble. He backed up like a goat, took a running leap, missed the cushion on the first try, and bounced off onto the rug. But he didn't even whimper, just got up, shook his head, and did it again. On the third try, he made it, proudly standing like a champion over a worn-out throw pillow. Ash didn't even stop eating. He just gave a quiet grunt, like, well, he's your problem now. It had been 2 weeks since I found Tessa and her pups. 2 weeks of feedings, cleaning, late-night barking, and long, quiet hours staring at the tiny balls of fur that had taken over my life. And I wouldn't have traded a second of it. The cabin that once felt so silent without Maggie now pulsed with energy, warmth, and the constant shuffling of tiny paws. Maple was still the smallest. I worried about her sometimes. She didn't wrestle as hard as the others, and she got pushed aside when it came to feeding time. But she was the only one who looked up at me every time I entered the room, like she was trying to read me, understand something. She was delicate, but sharp. I found myself carrying her around more often, just so the boys wouldn't trample her. I started keeping a journal about them, notebooks full of little observations, the way Birch would try to howl at the moon despite his squeaky voice, how Ash always curled his tail to the left. I don't know why I started. Maybe it was because I knew someone out there had loved Tessa. And if they ever came back, really came back, I wanted to be able to say, I saw them. I knew them. I didn't just keep them alive, I got to know who they were. One morning, a knock came on the door that nearly made me drop a whole bowl of formula. I opened it to find Ellie, the blanket lady, holding a Tupperware dish covered with foil. "Brought you lasagna," she said, not waiting for an invitation as she stepped inside. "Figured you might need something you can microwave. How are the little monsters?" "Loud," I said, "and Cedar thinks he owns the couch now." "Good for him," she said with a grin. "Every house needs a ruler." Ellie was about 50, with sun-browned arms, long gray blonde hair tied back in a braid, and a voice that made everything sound like it was part of an old folk song. She used to run the library before it got turned into a vape shop. Now she just tended chickens and kept to herself, mostly. But she'd taken a real shine to the puppies. She set the lasagna down and went straight to the pen, where Birch and Ash were busy mauling a chew toy made from an old sock. "They're getting big," she said. "That one looks like he could chase a deer already." "He tried to eat a fly yesterday. Missed. Landed face first in his water dish." She laughed, and then her face softened. "Any word from the family? Whoever left that note?" I shook my head. "Nothing." She nodded slowly, watching the pups tumble around. "I bet they're watching, just not ready yet. People get scared, even when they mean well." I hadn't thought of that. Maybe the note writer was someone who wasn't supposed to have Tessa, or someone who felt guilty, or just afraid to confront the past. Either way, I had the feeling they knew. They were out there. That night, something strange happened. I was doing my usual final check before bed, making sure each pup had a warm belly and a clean spot to sleep. I had just turned out the lights when Mabel started crying. Not the hungry cry, not the "I want to play" whine. This was different, sharper, urgent. I got out of bed and found her at the edge of the pen, staring at the window. There was nothing there. No raccoons, no breeze. Just darkness and the faint hum of crickets. But Mabel wouldn't stop staring. I picked her up, held her close. "It's okay, girl. You're safe. Nothing out there." She eventually settled, curling into my chest with a sigh. But I didn't sleep well. Dreams of tall grass, of Tessa's eyes, of something unfinished. The next morning, I called Dr. Cartwright. How soon is too soon to start bringing them outside? He gave me the usual lecture about vaccinations, exposure, and temperature. But when I told him they were getting restless and that I thought it might do them good, he finally said, "A few minutes at a time, supervised, soft ground, no other animals." So that afternoon, I took them into the backyard. One at a time at first, then all together. Watching them touch grass for the first time was something I wish I could bottle. The confusion, the excitement, the way Cedar barked at a dandelion like it owed him money. I sat under the maple tree with a thermos of coffee and just watched. For the first time since the morning I found Tessa, I felt like the world wasn't on fire. Like maybe things could settle. Like maybe we were finding our rhythm. Then I saw it. Just beyond the edge of the clearing at the far fence line. A flicker of movement. Too tall to be a raccoon. Too steady to be a deer. A person. By the time I stood up and shouted, they were already gone. I walked the edge of the fence, but found no tracks. No sign. Just an empty trail leading into the woods. I didn't tell Ellie, didn't tell Cartwright. But I started locking the doors again. Not because I felt threatened, but because I felt watched. Days passed. The pups grew fast. They figured out stairs, learned how to tug at pant legs. Mabel started bossing the boys around like she ran a daycare. Birch learned how to bark with his whole body. Ash became my shadow, never more than a few feet behind me. And Cedar. Cedar figured out how to open the kitchen drawer where I kept the treats. He only got away with it once. One morning, I found a bundle tied to my front gate. Inside was a faded collar. Purple. Frayed. A tag that read Tessa in worn lettering. And a note. "Thank you. I can't face them yet. But I'm so grateful. Please keep them safe." No name, no return address. But it was enough. I placed the collar in a shadow box and hung it over the mantel. Beneath it, I put a photo of the pups sleeping in a pile, Mabel right in the center. They were part of something bigger. And now, so was I. I never thought a dog would teach me how to read between the lines of silence. It had been nearly a month since I found Tessa, and her puppies were practically little dogs now. Mabel was still the smallest, but had taken to bossing her brothers with a quiet authority that reminded me of a kindergarten teacher with a whistle tucked in her back pocket. Ash was the steady one, always checking to make sure everyone was accounted for. Birch lived to chew, and half my socks had gone mysteriously missing. Cedar was Cedar. He could figure out how to unlock the back door using a broom and a push if I gave him another week. But it was Mabel who started acting strangely again. It was subtle at first. She'd wander off from the others during playtime, ears perked, staring out toward the fence line. Sometimes she'd whine low in her throat, not scared exactly, just searching. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a notepad in my lap, pretending to jot down a shopping list. But I was really watching her. Sure enough, she stood at the far end of the yard, completely still, looking into the trees. Her tail didn't wag. She didn't bark, but her gaze didn't waver either. When I called her, she came trotting back like nothing had happened, her tail curling as if to say, "You didn't see anything." But I had. And it got me thinking. The bundle with Tessa's collar. The note. The shadow by the fence. Someone was out there. Maybe more than one someone. I hadn't caught them, but Mabel had. Somehow, she just knew. I started leaving a lawn chair by the fence. Nothing too obvious. Just a quiet signal. The kind of thing someone watching might notice. I even left a bowl of water and a folded-up blanket beneath it. Then I waited. 2 days later, the blanket was gone. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ellie, not Dr. Cartwright, not even Mr. Dorsey when he dropped off more goat's milk. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something else. Like if I said it out loud, I might scare off whatever fragile thread was forming between the quiet woods and my noisy, fur-covered living room. A week passed. The pups were now venturing a little farther into the backyard under supervision. I had built a makeshift puppy pen with old chicken wire and gardening stakes. I sat outside in the evening light, watching them tumble around in the grass, their coats catching the gold of the sun. That's when I heard the voice. "You're doing a good job." I froze. It came from just beyond the tree line. Not loud. Calm. A man's voice. Not threatening. Not demanding. Just there. "I don't mean any harm," the voice continued. "I just wanted to see them." Mabel stood by the fence, tail wagging softly. I stood slowly, every instinct on edge. "Why don't you come out where I can see you?" There was a long pause. Then, from between the trees, stepped a man maybe in his early 30s. Tall, lean, wearing a battered flannel jacket and a ball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had the kind of look that said he spent more time outside than in. His boots were worn, his face lined with the kind of sadness you don't get from one bad year. He kept his distance. I didn't think anyone would stop. When we lost Tessa, we thought she got hit. We searched for days. Then I saw the photo at the vet's office, the one with the pups. I knew it was her. I nodded slowly, unsure whether to be cautious or welcoming. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Shame, mostly," he said. "Tessa wasn't mine. She belonged to my sister. We were watching her. But something spooked her that day. Gate got left open. She took off. I guess she was already pregnant." He looked past me, toward the puppies. I didn't know she was trying to get back to them until I read your post online. Saw the note you left pinned at the feed store. That picture you put up. She made it back to them. That's all she wanted. His voice caught then, just for a second. I'm Jonah, he said finally. I stuck out my hand. Chris. He shook it. We stood there for a minute, not really knowing what to say. You want to come closer? Meet them? I asked. He hesitated. If it's okay, I brought something. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a leather-bound photo album. Worn edges, the kind of thing you don't carry around unless it matters more than anything else you own. We sat on the porch while the puppies wrestled, and Jonah opened the album. There was Tessa, younger, her coat clean and shiny, tongue lolling out as she chased two kids through a sprinkler. Jonah pointed them out. My nephews, my sister's boys, they adored her. We all did. She was a good girl, strong, protective. She was brave, I said. He nodded. I still can't believe she made it that far injured, just to get help, just to make sure they lived. Dogs know things we don't. Yeah, they do. He stayed for about an hour. Didn't try to pick up the pups, just watched. Mabel curled up beside him like she'd known him her whole life. Birch tried to chew his shoelace. Ash stayed close to me. Cedar brought him a stick. Chewed halfway through. Before he left, Jonah stood and looked at the little crew. They got her eyes, he said. Especially the little one. Maple, you said? I nodded. She's going to be something special. After he left, I sat on the porch until the stars came out. The album lay beside me. He hadn't taken it back. I brought it inside and tucked it on the shelf by the fireplace, next to Tessa's collar. Days turned to weeks. The pups got bolder. I started taking them on short car rides in twos. Birch and Cedar howled the whole time. Maple and Ash sat quietly, eyes glued to the windows. Dr. Cartwright gave them their first round of shots. He called them the healthiest batch of wild hooligans he'd ever seen. I started posting updates on a community board. Folks from town came by. One couple fell in love with Birch the moment he climbed into their cooler. A retired schoolteacher couldn't stop smiling when Cedar sat on her foot like he'd claimed it. But I hadn't decided what to do yet. Whether I could let them go, whether I should. One evening Jonah came back. This time he had a bag of toys and some grain-free treats. Maple ran to him immediately. We talked over coffee on the back porch, the air buzzing with late summer sounds. My sister moved back last month, Jonah said. Boys are with her now. They ask about Tessa every night. They know what happened? Some of it. We said she had to go help some babies who needed her. I smiled. They weren't wrong. He sipped his coffee. Would you be okay if they came to meet the pups? Not to take, just to meet. I nodded. Of course. Something about that felt right, and as Maple snuggled into Jonah's side and drifted off, I realized something. Maybe Tessa hadn't just found help for her babies. Maybe she'd found something for all of us. We just had to figure out what came next. The boys arrived on a Saturday morning with wide eyes and cautious steps. The younger one, Micah, was maybe 6, clinging to a stuffed dinosaur in one hand and Jonah's leg with the other. The older, Levi, had freckles across his nose and the solemn look of a child who'd learned too early how to be careful with his heart. Their mother, Dana, stood just behind them, thin and pale, her hair tied back, and her hands folded so tightly I could see her knuckles go white. Jonah had warned me she'd be nervous. Losing Tessa had crushed her more than she'd ever let on, and being here now, where her dog's final story had played out, was reopening something raw. I gave her space. I opened the door, stepped aside, and let them take it in on their terms. The pups were in the sunroom, napping in a pile. Mabel was on top, as always. Cedar's back paw twitched in his sleep. Ash lay with his nose tucked under Birch's tail, peaceful and warm. Micah saw them first and let out a quiet gasp. "Babies," he whispered. Levi didn't move for a moment. Then slowly he stepped forward and knelt by the edge of the dog bed. "They really are hers," he said. Dana walked to the window but didn't come all the way in. Her eyes stayed on Mabel. "She looks just like her. The eyes, the ears, even the way she sleeps," she murmured. Mabel stirred then, blinking slowly, ears twitching as if she heard her name in the air. She looked straight at Dana, then at the boys, and padded over, calm and certain, like she'd known them all along. Micah crouched down, and Mabel pressed her nose to his little hand. He giggled. "She's not scared." "No," Jonah said from behind. "She remembers." Dana sank slowly into the armchair and covered her mouth. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she didn't speak. But she didn't look away, either. We stayed in the sunroom for hours. I brought out juice for the boys, coffee for the adults, and let the pups roam under careful watch. Cedar immediately tried to chew the shoelace off Micah's sneaker. Birch wanted to play tug-of-war with Levi's sleeve. Ash followed Jonah like a shadow, but Mabel stayed close to Dana. It was like watching something stitch itself back together. By the time they left, Dana had asked if they could visit again soon. She didn't make promises, didn't talk about adoption or claiming anyone, just asked if she could come back. I told her the door was always open. The next few weeks felt like a rhythm settling into place. I started marking visits on the calendar. The boys came every Saturday. Dana stayed longer each time. She brought toys, treats, even a few photos of Tessa as a puppy. Mabel sat at her feet while she talked, her paw sometimes resting on Dana's shoe like a silent anchor. Jonah helped me repair the old fence. We built a bigger run out back for the pups to play in. Neighbors began to stop by more frequently, drawn by word of mouth or curiosity. Some came to adopt. Birch left with a newlywed couple from the next town over who had a fenced yard and too much energy to spare. Cedar went to an older man named Pete, who lived alone and had lost his last dog 2 years prior. He cried when Cedar fell asleep in his lap. It hurt more than I thought it would. Saying goodbye, packing their blankets and toys, handing over bottles of shampoo and vaccination records. But each time, I knew it was right. Ash stayed. From the beginning, he'd been the quiet one. Watchful. Grounded. I knew I couldn't let him go. He'd carved out a place beside me, and I had no interest in closing it off. That left Mabel, and Mabel wasn't going anywhere. By mid-September, the leaves were turning. Gold and copper fluttered through the air, and the wind had that clean, crisp smell of change. I woke up early every morning to find Mabel watching the horizon through the porch railings, ears perked, as if waiting for something I couldn't see. Dana started bringing the boys during the week, sometimes just for an hour after school. Micah helped me fill food bowls. Levi sat quietly beside Mabel and read aloud from his books. They weren't here for the pups anymore. They were here for her. One evening, as we sat on the porch with blankets across our laps and cider in hand, Dana looked over at me. "Do you think Tessa would forgive me?" she asked. It caught me off guard. Forgive you? For what? For not being the one to find her. For not running after her when she disappeared. For letting someone else do what I should have. I didn't rush an answer. Mabel laid her head on Dana's feet. She picked you, I said softly. She didn't just find anyone. She found someone who would fight for her babies, who would raise them and love them until the right people were ready. Dana nodded, eyes wet. I think she already forgave you. The day Mabel walked into your lap. That was the moment Dana told me she was ready. Not to take Mabel away. Not exactly. But to share her. To be part of her life. To make sure she grew up knowing both her homes. We worked out a plan. I kept her during the week. They came for her on weekends. At first, it felt complicated. But Mabel didn't seem confused. She bounced between the homes like she understood something the rest of us were still figuring out. Ash didn't mind either. In fact, when Mabel was away, he got spoiled with solo hikes and nap time on my lap. Jonah and I kept fixing up the place. The old shed became a proper kennel for emergency rescues. Word had spread. Folks started calling when they found abandoned litters or injured strays. I wasn't trying to become a rescue center. It just happened. And every time I thought about turning someone away, I remembered Tessa. She hadn't begged for herself. She had crawled out of the woods, bleeding and shaking, because she wanted someone to save her babies. And in doing so, she saved all of us. I found the shoebox buried in the old garden shed, right beneath a crate of tangled holiday lights and a busted lantern I'd meant to fix 2 winters ago. The box itself was plain, but inside, tucked between an old dog collar and a faded newspaper clipping, was a bundle of photographs. Not mine, someone else's. Tessa was in most of them. She was younger in these, thinner. Her coat a lighter gold, her eyes clearer, her smile huge in every frame. The photos showed her at a campsite, under a picnic table, wearing a ridiculous red bandana beside a boy who looked an awful lot like Jonah in high school. There were other faces too. His sister, Dana, with braces and big sunglasses. A man I didn't recognize. Tall, wide-shouldered, and always holding the camera. In the bottom of the box was a note, folded and stained. The handwriting was blocky and awkward. Found these after the storm. Didn't have the heart to throw them away. Figured you might want them back one day. R. I stared at the box for a long time. I hadn't expected a past to arrive so suddenly in my lap. I set the collar aside and slipped the photos into a plastic sleeve. The note went back in the envelope. Something told me this belonged with the family now, whatever that meant anymore. It had been over 3 months since Tessa's pups were born, and the world had changed in a quiet, steady way. Mabel was thriving with her dual home arrangement. She spent weekdays at my place and weekends with Dana and the boys. She'd grown lanky, quick on her feet, smart as a whip. She could already fetch, sit, and lie down on command, when she felt like it. Ash had mellowed into a calm, sweet presence around the house. He followed me from room to room, never demanding, just near. When I mowed the lawn, he lay on the porch. When I chopped wood, he sat at a distance, watching like a small, loyal foreman. Then came Holly. A call came in just before dusk on a Tuesday. Ellie, who somehow seemed to know every animal emergency in 3 counties, told me there was a dog under the bridge by the old grain mill. Alone. Not moving. I'd go myself, she said, but last time I climbed down there I nearly broke my hip. Can you check? I grabbed a flashlight, some jerky, and an old towel. The bridge wasn't far. It sat on the edge of town, mostly used by logging trucks and the occasional deer. I parked at the side and made my way down the embankment. It was steeper than I remembered. The dog was there, curled against the support column, mud-covered, thin. Her eyes barely opened when I approached. She didn't growl. She didn't move. "Honey," I said softly. "It's okay. I'm just here to help." Her ears twitched. That was it. I set the jerky down and knelt. Slowly, carefully, I lifted her. She was lighter than I expected. Bones and fur. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Back at home, I called Dr. Cartwright, who met me after hours. We worked in silence, checking vitals, cleaning her up. He kept shaking his head. "She's been out there a while. Starved. Maybe dumped. I can't say for sure. But she's lucky you found her." I stayed up with her through the night. Ash lay beside the crate, head resting on his paws. Mabel watched from the doorway, alert but not anxious. Somehow, they knew. I named her Holly. Her fur, once scrubbed clean, was a pale reddish brown, almost cinnamon. Her eyes were cloudy with exhaustion, but kind. She didn't bark, didn't whine, just rested. Dana and the boys came the next day. Micah brought a hand-drawn get-well card with a picture of a dog, a sunshine, and a bowl labeled Love. Jonah arrived later, carrying a bag of canned food and medical bandages. Holly recovered in stages. First came water, then food, then the first tail wag. It was barely a twitch, but it set off a celebration in the kitchen. Ash became her closest companion. He slept near her crate, shared his favorite toys, even offered her his spot under the maple tree. Maple, to my surprise, was standoffish. She watched, circled, and sometimes growled under her breath. I couldn't tell if it was jealousy or suspicion, but I didn't force it. Then one day, it changed. I was in the yard raking leaves when I saw Maple trot over to Holly, drop her chew bone in front of her, and sit. Holly looked at the bone, looked at Maple, then nudged it back. Maple stood, nudged it forward. Back and forth they went, until Holly gave up and took the bone. Maple barked once, triumphant. They were friends now. By late October, Holly could walk the length of the yard without stopping. She chased squirrels slowly and took naps in the sun. She'd become part of the home before I even noticed it happening. It reminded me of how it all began. Not with a plan, not with an application or a checklist, just a need. A quiet plea from a creature who had no words but trusted me to understand anyway. I gave the photo box to Dana on her next visit. She looked through it slowly, running her fingers across the images like they were pages in a novel she hadn't read in years. "That one," she whispered, holding up a shot of Tessa lying on her back with Levi curled into her side. That was after the flood. She wouldn't leave his bed until he stopped crying. Micah leaned over. "Was that me?" "No, baby," she said gently. "That was your brother. You weren't born yet." Levi held the photo longer. Then, without a word, he placed it on my mantle beside the collar and the puppy photo. "She belongs here too," he said. There was nothing left to say after that. The wind carried a bite to it that morning. Not the bitter cold of full winter, but the kind that made you pull your sleeves down and think twice before stepping out without your jacket. Ash waited at the door, his nose pressed to the glass, tail gently sweeping the rug. Maple sat beside him, more patient but equally alert. Holly, now strong enough to stand without wobbling, stayed nestled in the corner of the couch under her blanket, watching them both with calm eyes. I opened the door, and Ash led the way, stepping onto the porch like he owned it. Mabel followed, ears up, scanning the yard. I brought out a thermos of coffee and leaned against the railing, watching the trees rustle and dance in the breeze. It was quiet, peaceful, but a different kind of quiet than the one I'd known before Tessa. Dana had started sending over books about animal behavior. At first I thought it was just something to pass the time, but the more I read, the more I saw in the dogs. Holly's flinching at loud sounds wasn't random. The way Mabel hovered near the gate before Jonah arrived, there were patterns, signals. They were speaking in ways I hadn't always paid attention to. I started a notebook just for Holly, notes on her progress, her triggers, her habits. She had a way of curling her paws under her chest like a fox when she rested. She favored her right side. She liked classical music in the evening. Violins made her relax. I started playing Bach after dinner, and she'd fall asleep by the fireplace like it was something she'd known her whole life. The boys came by with Dana that afternoon. Levi brought a board game. Micah had a bag of peanut butter biscuits he'd made at school for Pet Week. Mabel followed him like a shadow, tail wagging double time. Ash sniffed the biscuits, decided they passed inspection, and then wandered off to nap under the porch. "Any news on that new pup Ellie mentioned?" Dana asked as she helped me fold towels on the porch. I nodded. "She said he's just skin and bones, dumped by the train tracks. Animal control won't come for another 3 days. Figured I'd go check him out tomorrow." She gave me a look, one I'd come to know well. "I know," I said, raising my hands. "I've got a full house already." "But you're going to do it anyway." I smiled. Probably. The next morning, I drove out toward the edge of town. The train tracks curved around an old industrial lot, mostly weeds and concrete slabs now. I parked by the old grain silo and walked down the tracks, scanning the brush. I found him curled beneath a pile of rusted sheet metal. Thin, shaking. Not much bigger than a loaf of bread. Some kind of terrier mix, black and white with patches of dirt and missing fur. One ear flopped over. The other stood straight like an antenna. "Hey, buddy," I said, crouching low. He didn't run, just stared. Mistrustful, but not aggressive. I set a piece of chicken jerky down and stepped back. He sniffed it, took it, ate it so fast I wasn't sure he chewed. "You've had a rough go, huh?" I inched closer, slowly, talking the whole time. After 10 minutes, he let me lift him. He didn't weigh more than 10 pounds. I wrapped him in a towel and whispered all the way back to the truck. At home, Holly perked up when I carried him in. She sniffed the towel, then me. Mabel stood at the edge of the kitchen, tail still, watching. Ash wandered in, sniffed once, then flopped down on the rug. I set the new arrival, whom I decided to name Scout, on a heating pad and sat beside him. "You're going to be okay now. You hear me?" He slept for almost a full day. When he woke, he barked at his own reflection in the stove door. Mabel jumped up like someone had lit a firecracker, and I couldn't stop laughing. Scout was different, loud, unpredictable. He had a high-pitched yip that made Holly flinch and Mabel growl. But Ash? Ash treated him like a little brother. He let Scout chew his ears, climb over his back, and steal his treats. He never once growled. I called Dr. Cartwright to set up another exam. He chuckled when I told him. "You're going to need a waiting room of your own pretty soon," he said. While I waited for the appointment, I started crate training Scout. He didn't like being confined at first. I had to sit beside the crate, hand through the bars until he fell asleep. He'd wake up crying if I moved. Mabel, after a few days, accepted him, begrudgingly. She taught him to stay away from her food bowl, and that jumping on her tail came with a price. But she never hurt him, and one night I found them curled up together, just a tail, under the kitchen table. Holly took longer. She watched him from afar, never quite trusting. But over time, she started lying closer. Then letting him drink from her bowl, then licking his ear once before bedtime. The rhythm shifted again. More bowls, more barking, more energy, more love. Jonah helped me build a second pen outside. Dana brought over a donation bin from her workplace filled with toys, towels, and dog beds. Levi and Micah painted the side of the shed with paw prints. Ellie started calling me the Dog Whisperer of Sycamore Ridge. I didn't correct her. We set up a Facebook page to post updates. Scout's before and after photos went semi-viral. Donations started trickling in. A woman from 3 towns over brought blankets and asked if she could volunteer. Something was happening. Not just in my house, but in the town. Folks who hadn't talked to each other in years were swapping dog stories at the diner. Kids were making thank you signs for the rescue center that didn't exist yet. And all of it, every part, had started with one dog dragging herself out of the woods with a look that said, "Please help my babies." I sat on the porch that night, coffee in hand, Ash at my feet, Scout asleep in the rocking chair beside me. Maple and Holly were curled up on the couch, the fireplace casting shadows across the walls. Somewhere in the trees, an owl hooted. A breeze rolled through the grass. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about how quiet the world had felt before all this, and how much fuller it was now. Not louder, just more alive. I'd stopped wondering how long I could keep this up. The question now was how far it would go. Because love like this didn't stay small, it spread. The first snow came earlier than expected. Light flurries at first, just a dusting on the grass and rooftops, but enough to set the whole household into a state of excited chaos. Maple chased flakes in the yard, leaping and skidding like the ground had turned into a trampoline. Scout yipped at every falling flake, trying to catch them in his mouth. Ash, dignified as ever, stepped out cautiously and gave me a look like, "You brought this upon us?" Holly didn't go far from the porch. She rested beside the top step, watching the others play with something between tolerance and curiosity. The cold didn't seem to bother her much anymore, but she still liked being close to the door, as if needing the option of warmth nearby kept her anchored. I shoveled a path from the porch to the shed, pausing every so often to sip coffee from a thermos and toss snowballs for Maple to chase. The boys came by later with Dana, bundled up in coats and dragging a plastic sled. They stayed through the afternoon, helping me hang solar lights on the fence posts and tucking extra hay into the outdoor dog beds. That night, when everything was quiet again, I sat on the couch with Ash and Maple pressed against my legs, Scout snoring from inside the laundry basket he'd claimed as his personal den. Holly lay by the fire, her breathing deep and steady. I realized I hadn't heard her whimper in her sleep for weeks. I reached over to the bookshelf, pulled out the journal I'd started when the first pups arrived, and flipped to a blank page. December 3rd. Holly. Ate full dinner. No sign of limping. Scout. Chewed through second leash. Maple. Learned to open the front gate latch. Ash. Still perfect. The next morning, I found a cardboard box on my porch. No note. No markings. Just a blanket and 3 tiny puppies huddled inside. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old, All three were trembling, their ribs visible, fur patchy. One had an eye sealed shut. Another was trying to climb the edge of the box, whining with a voice that cracked halfway through each breath. I rushed them inside, laid them on a warm pad, and started calling. Dr. Cartwright answered after the second ring. "Bring them in, now. I'll prep a heat lamp and formula." Scout followed me to the truck, confused, tail wagging cautiously. He didn't bark, didn't fuss, just looked up at me like he understood something serious was happening. At the clinic, Cartwright moved with quiet urgency. He examined each pup, murmuring to himself. The smallest one wasn't responding well to touch. "Malnourished, possibly left out all night," he muttered. "We'll do what we can." I stayed by their side while the vet worked. He handed me syringes and instructions, and I helped feed them drop by drop. They were too weak to nurse. I kept rubbing their backs, whispering, "Come on, little ones. Not here. Not now." By the time we left, it was dark again. The cold had deepened. I held the box close on the ride back, heater on full blast. At home, I set up a makeshift nursery in the sunroom. Holly came and lay beside it without prompting. Mabel sniffed at the edge of the blanket but didn't climb in. Ash lay near the doorway, watching. Scout curled up beside the heat pad and didn't move. Only 2 of the 3 pups made it through the night. I buried the smallest under the oak tree the next morning, wrapped in part of the blanket they'd come with. Ash stood beside me as I worked. When I finished, I sat in the snow and watched my breath puff into the cold air, trying to understand how people could be so cruel or so careless. Jonah came by that afternoon with supplies, puppy pads, heating lamps, more formula. He didn't ask questions, just helped set things up. "They left them on your porch?" he said finally. I nodded. No note, no explanation. He shook his head. They probably thought they were doing the right thing, leaving them with someone who'd care. I would have helped if they'd just asked. I know. Dana came the next day. She brought soup and gloves. The boys sat beside the box for hours, talking softly to the surviving pups. They named them Nutmeg and Clover. Over the next week, I barely slept. Feedings every few hours, monitoring temperature, weighing them. Cartwright came by twice, just to check. Ellie brought fresh bedding and a jar of homemade salve for their dry skin. Maple took to guarding the box like it was her job. Anytime Scout got too close, she'd let out a warning bark. He'd back off, ears drooped, then sit nearby like he was taking notes. I added another section to the journal. December 10th. Nutmeg. Weighed up by 6OZ. Clover. Started suckling on her own. Maple. Promoted to head of security. Scout. Learning boundaries. It wasn't just the dogs who changed. I changed too. There was a time I wouldn't have opened my door for anyone, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't think I had anything to offer. The cabin was quiet, peaceful, safe. But it had also been small. Not in size, but in purpose. Now it buzzed with life, with warmth, with connection. Holly had started wagging her tail when people visited. Maple had stopped flinching at thunder. Ash had taken to nudging Scout forward whenever he hesitated, like an older brother pushing his sibling into the pool. The days moved quickly after that. Snow piled along the fence lines. The town threw a winter fair, and someone hung a banner reading Sycamore Ridge Animal Haven above our booth. We'd set up a table with flyers, photos of the dogs, and a jar that said, "Help us help more." Kids stopped by to pet Maple. Adults asked how they could help. I told them we needed blankets, food, time, whatever they had. We came home with 2 more volunteers, 3 adoption requests, and an envelope of cash donations I hadn't expected. That night, I stood on the porch and looked out at the snowy field, the moonlight glinting off the drifts. I heard paws behind me. Ash, then Mabel, then Scout, then Holly, slowly and carefully. They all sat beside me, watching the world in silence. There was more coming. More dogs. More stories. More work. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world had pressed pause, just long enough for all of us to breathe. The ice storm came in without warning. 1 minute we were preparing for a light dusting, the next the trees were bowed with shimmering weight. Power lines sagged under silver coils, and the roads turned slick in a matter of hours. The electricity flickered around dusk, buzzed once, and vanished. Scout howled. I grabbed the flashlight, checked the fuse box, then checked the dogs. Ash remained calm, lying near the firewood pile like a seasoned captain bracing for a storm. Mabel was pacing by the front window, alert, but not alarmed. Holly didn't move much anymore in the evenings, but she lifted her head and watched me. Her eyes, always so quiet, seemed to ask if we were okay. The puppies, Nutmeg and Clover, squeaked from their basket. I'd been transitioning them to a larger play area, but I was glad now they were still in the warmest corner of the house. I stoked the fire, added logs until it cracked bright and high. The thermometer inside read 56. That wouldn't last long. I gathered all the blankets from the upstairs linen closet and built a nest around the hearth. One by one, I moved the dogs. Holly first, then the pups, then Mabel and Scout. Ash came last, his eyes steady as he followed me. We curled up in a circle of warmth, the room flickering with shadows. I boiled water on the wood stove, poured it into sealed jars, and wrapped them in socks to place near the puppies. It was a trick I'd read in one of Dana's books. Dana. I tried calling her but got nothing. Same with Jonah. I knew their house was tucked behind the ridge, more exposed. I hoped they had backup heat. The next morning, the world outside looked like a glass painting. Every branch glistened, every blade of grass sparkled, but it was still. Too still. I left food in bowls, wrapped myself in layers, and set out to check on my neighbors. Ash came with me, his paws crunching through the ice. Ellie's place was first. Her chickens had made it through the night, and she was already spreading feed in her yard like nothing had happened. "About time you showed up," she called, smiling through chattering teeth. "You've got some serious tail wagging to do at my place. I told my neighbor you were a saint. Don't make a liar out of me." We laughed. I checked her generator, helped her haul water, and then kept moving. 2 more houses. Then Jonah's. I found him on the roof with a snow shovel. "You're a lunatic," I called. He grinned. "I like a challenge." Dana waved from the window, a candle flickering behind her. Inside, the boys were bundled in sleeping bags, Scout's photo taped to the wall. "We've been doing okay," she said. "Had a scare last night when the pipes groaned, but nothing burst. And the boys made maple sugar candy on the snow, so they think it's the best vacation ever." Back home, the fire had burned low. I refueled it, checked paws for ice, and passed out biscuits. Holly leaned against my side as I read aloud from the newspaper, half frozen on the porch when I retrieved it. 2 days of this, I told her. Then maybe we'll see the sun again. That night, the wind howled. It sounded like wolves, or maybe ghosts, brushing against the corners of the cabin. Mabel barked. Twice. Scout buried his head under my arm. Holly shivered. I pulled her closer, wrapping the quilt tighter. Sometime around midnight, there was a thump on the porch. Ash was up before I even opened my eyes. I crept to the window and peered out. A man stood there, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather, holding something bundled in a towel. I opened the door slowly. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I found him by the river. I can't keep him. I didn't know where else to go." He handed me the bundle. Inside was a small black puppy, barely breathing. I stepped aside. "Come in." He shook his head. I just needed to make sure someone cared. Then he turned and walked back into the storm. I wanted to run after him, but the puppy whimpered, and I knew I had to choose. We named the pup Cole, for the color of his fur and the fact he arrived in fire weather. He spent the night between Holly and Scout, pressed into the warmest part of the pile. By morning, he was drinking formula and lifting his head. The man never came back. Ash sat by the door most of the day after, tail still, waiting. The power returned 2 nights later. Lights flickered back to life. Heat surged through the vents. The dogs barked in unison like they were cheering. I cried, just a little, quietly. Jonah came by with wood, and Ellie brought soup. Dana and the boys showed up in mismatched gloves and big smiles. The cabin was full again, not just of animals, but of people. Community. I found a note under the welcome mat that evening. "You saved something I couldn't. Thank you." No name, no explanation. But I knew. Just like before, someone had trusted me with something they loved and couldn't keep. And I wasn't going to let them down. Cole had a way of walking like he was stepping on clouds, his little paws barely making a sound on the wood floors. Despite being the youngest, he carried himself like he belonged here all along. He didn't whimper at night, didn't flinch when someone walked by. He curled up beside Holly during the first evening he spent in the cabin and didn't move until morning. Holly, for her part, treated him like a strange new puzzle. She licked his ears once, then let him be. It was Mabel who struggled the most. Not out of jealousy, but out of protectiveness. She watched Cole constantly, shadowed him through the hallways, kept her nose inches from his tail whenever he wandered too far. She seemed to take his arrival as a mission, and Ash, bless him, let her take lead on this one. Scout, on the other hand, treated Cole like a tiny toy. He barked at him once, was immediately scolded by Holly and ignored by Cole, and from then on approached with cautious excitement. They became fast playmates, tumbling across the floor with gentle yips and bounces. Scout shared his rope toy, which up until then no dog had been allowed to touch. The mornings began earlier now. The routine had grown longer, feeding, cleaning, checking paws for frostbite, shoveling a path through the snow before the sun even peeked over the ridge. I'd never known this kind of tiredness. Not the kind you resent. The kind that settles into your muscles and makes you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. I kept the journal going. The entry on December 18th read, "Cole, eyes clearer, tail wagged twice. Mabel, initiated playtime. Scout, slept with his nose on Cole's neck. Ash, standing guard again. Holly, let out a soft bark in her sleep." Jonah stopped by with plywood and insulation panels. "You're building another pen," he said flatly. "I'm considering options," I replied, knowing full well I already had measurements marked in the snow. Dana dropped off more blankets and a box of framed photos of Tessa. One of them showed her with her paw draped over Jonah's boot, while he held a thermos and laughed. The kind of candid photo that made you feel like you knew her. "I thought the pups might like to have her picture nearby," Dana said, "so they remember where they came from." We hung the photo beside the front window, just above where Ash liked to nap. It caught the afternoon sun perfectly, turning her golden fur into something radiant. Cole's strength came in waves. Some days he ran from room to room, tripping over his own feet with the urgency of a dog who believed the world was on fire. Other days, he lay curled beside the hearth, barely lifting his head. Dr. Cartwright came to check on him personally, his hands gentle and steady. "He's recovering faster than I expected," he said. "Whatever fire this little guy has, it's strong. You're doing good, Chris." It still surprised me when people said that. I didn't feel like I was doing anything exceptional. Just listening. Showing up. Leaving the porch light on for anyone, man or beast, who needed it. A few days before Christmas, we held a small gathering for the neighbors. Nothing extravagant. Just cocoa, a fire pit out front, and a banner that read, "Home for every paw," strung across the old garden fence. Kids came in mittens too big for their hands. Adults brought tins of cookies and coffee cake. We handed out flyers with adoption info. Dana read a short story about kindness. Jonah and I grilled sausages. Ellie brought out her banjo and played a song that no one knew, but everyone liked. Cole sat on my shoulder like a parrot for most of the evening. Mabel didn't leave his side. Ash made rounds like a bouncer at a club. Holly stayed inside but watched the whole thing through the window, her ears twitching whenever someone laughed. Near the end of the night, a man approached me with a woman holding a small crate. "I heard you're the one to talk to if you've got a stray and a heart that's breaking," he said, setting the crate down. Inside was a dog that couldn't have weighed more than 8 pounds. Mostly fur, eyes hidden beneath long white strands, shivering from more than just the cold. "Her name's Mabel," the woman whispered. "She belonged to my mother. She passed last week. We can't keep her where we're staying." I nodded. "You did the right thing bringing her." They didn't stay long. I watched them walk back into the snowy street, hand in hand, their heads close. Inside, I introduced Mabel to the others. Cole sniffed once and moved aside. Mabel gave her a look like, "You break it. You bought it." Scout licked her cheek. Holly raised her head and barked once, low and quiet. It meant, "You're home now." Mabel didn't stop shaking that night, but she let me feed her. She let me hold her. And by morning she was asleep on a folded towel beside the fireplace. Christmas Eve came with another snowstorm, but the cabin stayed warm. Jonah slept on the couch, Micah in a sleeping bag beside Maple, Levi curled up with Ash. Donna and I drank cider by the fire, while Mabel dozed under the tree. No one said much. We didn't need to. Outside, the world had gone white and silent. Inside, it was full of breath and heartbeats, and the sound of tiny paws tapping across the floor. That night, I wrote in the journal, December 24th. Cole found his bark. Mabel followed me room to room. Scout gave up his favorite blanket. Maple watching over both. Ash held his place beside Levi. Holly slept with her nose on my knee. The lights twinkled. The fire crackled. And something I hadn't felt in years filled the room. Not peace exactly, but purpose. And maybe that was even better. The snow melted slower than usual that January, turning the yard into a patchwork of soft mud and brittle grass. Ash took to navigating it like a practiced scout, stepping only where the ground seemed firm. Maple, as always, didn't care. She bounded through puddles with Cole at her heels, the two of them tracking paw prints from the front door to the back shed. Scout had begun burying things, old toys, biscuits, one of my gloves, and then promptly forgetting where he left them. Mabel followed me everywhere, her tiny nails clicking softly against the hardwood, her white fur like a moving cloud beside my boots. Holly stayed inside more now. The cold didn't agree with her joints anymore, and when I carried her outside in the mornings, she leaned into me like a memory, quiet and close. Her breaths were shallower these days, slower, but she still greeted me with a nudge of her nose and rested her head beside my leg during breakfast. Dana came by often, even on days when the roads were slushy. She helped restock the pantry and clean the crates. Levi and Micah had memorized the names of every dog. They made name tags from craft foam and stuck them over each food bowl. The back room held more beds now, and we'd put up hooks for jackets and bags by the door. It looked less like a cabin and more like a shared home, patched together with purpose and motion. By mid-January, the town had started calling the place The Ridge. Not a shelter, not a rescue, just the Ridge. People started leaving donations at the gate, blankets, towels, half-used bags of food, collars, toys, sometimes even notes. He followed me home, but I can't keep him. Please help. She's been alone since my dad passed. Needs someone who has time. 3 puppies found near the river. We didn't know what else to do. We never turned one away. I built a second outdoor pen with Jonah. Ellie organized a supply chain from 3 towns over. Dr. Cartwright started holding free weekend clinics from his truck in the driveway. Dana made a new sign with painted paw prints across the top. Ash supervised all of it with the gravitas of a general. Maple chased Scout under the picnic tables, while Cole attempted to join every task, whether invited or not. Mabel kept track of the front door, alerting us with the tiniest of barks whenever someone new arrived. And Holly stayed by the hearth. Her place, her center. We received a letter in early February. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address, just a sketch of a shepherd dog drawn on the envelope in pencil. I opened it at the table. The handwriting was clean, but hesitant. I think Tessa was ours. My brother didn't tell me she was gone. I only found out later. I wasn't ready to know what happened. I'm sorry for the silence. I wanted to thank you in person, but I couldn't find the words. I don't think I could have done what you did, but I'm glad someone could. She was a good dog. She deserved more than what we gave her. Please keep doing what you're doing. The world needs it. She'd be proud. There was no name, just a pressed flower tucked into the fold. A daisy. I added it to the journal, flattening it between 2 pages, and wrote underneath, February 6th, Tessa, never forgotten. Ash, watching the sunrise. Maple, licked Cole's ear until he growled. Scout, dug up his own leash. Mabel, fell asleep in my sock drawer. Holly, heart steady, breaths deep. But 2 weeks later, I wrote something different. February 20th, Holly, no longer eating, still drinking, sleeps more, watching less. I knew what was coming, so did Ash. He stayed by her side without being told. Maple curled beside her every night. Cole brought her soft toys and laid them beside her paws. Mabel rested against her side, keeping her warm. Holly didn't suffer. She drifted. The morning I knew she wouldn't get up, I carried her to the porch and sat with her in my lap, wrapped in 2 blankets as the sun rose over Sycamore Ridge. She looked at me, long and deep, then at each of the others, one by one. Ash, Maple, Scout, Cole, Mabel, and me. Then she closed her eyes. When I buried her under the old oak tree, I didn't do it alone. Dana stood with her hand on my shoulder. Jonah helped lower the wooden box. Levi and Micah laid painted stones around the edge. Ellie brought wildflowers. Cartwright said nothing, just nodded once and touched his chest. Ash stood like a sentinel until the last shovel of dirt was packed. Then sat. That night, the house felt quieter, still full, still warm, but quieter. I didn't write in the journal. I just sat by the fire and let the silence settle. In the morning, Maple brought me her leash. She didn't bark, didn't wag, just looked at me. So we walked. Down the ridge path, through the trees, across the clearing where I first saw Tessa. I hadn't been back there since. Maple sniffed at the brush. Cole ran ahead and tripped over his own legs. Scout rolled in something unidentifiable. Ash walked beside me. At the edge of the woods, we stopped. I took a breath. The air smelled like thawing earth, like change. Back home, I wrote again. February 22nd. Holly. Still here, always will be. Maple. Leads the walks now. Scout. Finally understands fetch. Cole. Growing stronger. Ash. Steady. Mabel. Waits at the gate. The weeks passed. Spring came early. Grass grew green again. The pens dried out. The porch was repainted. And then one day a knock on the door. A woman stood there with a clipboard and a lopsided smile. "I'm with the State Animal Welfare Initiative. We've been hearing about what you're doing here, and I'm here to ask, would you consider becoming official?" She handed me a brochure. Licensing. Grants. Volunteer programs. We'd help you expand. It's still yours, just with support. I looked out the window. Ash stood with Cole by the gate. Maple was leading a small pack of volunteers on a leash training walk. Scout was chewing through yet another towel. Mabel was asleep in a sunbeam. I turned back to the woman. "I'm listening." That evening, I opened the journal and wrote on a fresh page, March 10th. New chapter begins. And underneath that, with her last breath, she asked me to save her babies. And without knowing it, she saved all of us.